from this decoupled media. I'm going to be showing us some parts. And what I'm talking about is this conversation about nuclear plants, nuclear reactors, nuclear fuel, nuclear weapons. I'm onto them. This is the situation where men around the world have had an agenda to control women, and these guys even talk about it. They mention it, like Westinghouse from 1950, the International Electrical Engineers people, IEE people. They're all in on this. This is man's agenda against woman to control her and her children. So let's listen to this.
Uranium and plutonium in order to be able to selectively pull them out
it's
probably well above my head for their large scale reprocessing, and even though there aren't that many of them.
And Purex stands for?
Purex is plutonium uranium redox reaction, and so I'm not going to go too much into the chemistry because, quite frankly, it's complicated and well above my head in terms of electron states and things like that. But in principle, it's not that complicated to understand. What you're basically doing in the Purex process is you're manipulating the reduction and oxidation states of uranium and plutonium in order to be able to selectively pull them out of some other material. And we'll walk through just like what does one of these plants look like and what are they doing at each of the different steps. So the La Hague facility in France is probably the best example. This is the largest one in
La Hague. Is he saying La Hague? Well, I don't know. I think that's in Switzerland. La Hague, huh?
The world by far. And it reprocesses fuel from France, from at least at past they were reprocessing from Japan, from the German reactors when they were running. So anybody that wanted to send their fuel to France for reprocessing, this is the facility that would do it. So as you and I think most people know, nuclear fuel is quite radioactive and difficult to be near. So unlike fresh fuel,
I'm sorry. What was that? It's radioactive, difficult to be near. Okay, what we're going to start doing is we're just going to start paying attention to the words that they use. Because if these guys were actually nuclear, if these guys were actually nuclear engineers, they wouldn't be using words like this. So
that would do it. So as you and I think most people know, spent nuclear fuel is quite...
Sorry, I had to stop it just now because I was going to blurt it out. Spent nuclear, we all know, spent nuclear fuel, sorry.
They are fuel to France for reprocessing. This is the facility that would do it. So as you and I think most people know, spent nuclear fuel is quite radioactive and difficult to be near. So unlike fresh fuel, which you can be near and handle with open cranes and things like that, spent nuclear fuel needs to be sent in enormously large shielded canisters that are sealed shut, transported either by boat or by truck with, they're quite large in terms of like diameter, maybe like 2 or 3 meters in diameter. And that can contain like on the order of a dozen or maybe 20 fuel assemblies. So getting the fuel there is already a little bit difficult. Not impossible, but it's an additional hurdle compared to a fresh fuel assembly.
A fresh fuel assembly.
It needs to be taken out and it does be kind of initially cleaned off. And again, because this is spent fuel, now everything needs to be handled with radiation protection. So
let's mention this about radiation. So what we need to do is we need to put ourselves in the frame of mind that what we're applying this lingo on top of some other type of understanding. Same thing that goes on with genetic science, same thing that goes on with a whole lot of stuff. Okay, so we're looking for the words to be able to mean something else. And I'm going to tell you what my theory is, because this is what was done to me and my child. This was the situation by a man, by the way, who's got like 9 felony convictions, who was able to impregnate me, just dating me for a little while, getting me in the circumstance to force come inside of me, knowing that I wasn't going to be able to claim it as a rape or anything, take off, and then come back about the time that I'm giving birth to my child, and then be a harassment piece of shit from there on out until he was able to accomplish kidnapping my child. They use the family court system. They use harassment. They use lodging false. They got it all dialed in, okay? So anyway, so this guy's talking about how now it's spent fuel. And everything from that moment on is radioactive. Right, radioactive. That means that because and I'm trying to get to the bottom of it. What are they describing? They're describing a form of abuse, a form of control, a form of manipulation. And again, this is just my theory. I'm listening with open ears as well. But radioactive meaning like communications wise. This person can't have any access to communications because they can tell on these people. So just thought I put that out there. But you know, keep your ears open just in case you come up with a better theory than I do.
Taken out, and it does need to be kind of initially cleaned off. And again, because it's spent fuel, now everything needs to be handled with radiation protection. Absolutely everything that we're talking about from this point forward is done either in basically hot cell type of environments where your operators are not directly present. If they are nearby, they're behind very thick, like leaded glass. It's done in environments where things are well contained so that there's not, radiation exposure to people. So we take out the fuel assemblies from the canisters, we clean them off in basically just some water just to get some of the outside excess material off. And then depending on the actual plan, sometimes it just sits there for a while. Maybe the radioactivity is still too high. If it was freshly discharged, it may be thermally very hot and radiologically very hot.
So if you're following along, he said something very disturbing to me. It just needs to sit there for a little while. Sounds a lot like prisoner type talk. Sounds a whole lot like taking a hostage and having to get them underneath your control. But we're talking about a situation that involves. This is according to my theory. That's why I'm using my theory, and I'm looking for anything where it falls out, and it hasn't happened yet. It just continues to provide more information that validates my theory and fills it in. So we're dealing with children that are being taken from their mothers that are being triggered to react. That reaction being the reason why this man's able to go and get custody from the courts, and she has to pay him child support. And these guys are talking about seasons, that like time on, time off. And they're using words like the can do reactor versus the triso hard reactor. And then there's other ones that are like, it's absolutely madness. Okay. So anyway, now he's talking about how they need to let it sit for a certain period of time because it might be too radioactive. But do you see what I'm saying? Like if they're talking about nuclear, they said spent fuel is radioactive, but the fresh fuel assembly is not. Okay, I don't know. I would have thought that it was always radioactive no matter what. So there's little cracks in there, I pick up on them, and I'm telling you, I've watched so many of these videos. These guys give it away. They give it away. Oh, they're so in trouble.
And so it may sit in the facility in basically a spent fuel pool for some amount of time. And
spent fuel pool also, in my opinion, could be talking about taking these women out of communications. There's something. It's got something to do with it because I'm shadow banned. I'm silenced and sequestered. The four of you that are here with me are probably all agents. Welcome. I'm going to give you all the information I've got because as far as I'm concerned, I am not going to let my daughter just get kidnapped from me and me get systematically murdered, especially because I've got a role and a mission here on Earth. And that's for every single one of us, including these pieces of shit who are clearly suffering from their own mental illnesses. Carrying on.
Actually, this is one of the things that the plants do need to.
There goes three of them. They came, they left.
How long does it sit there? Because as we'll see in a little bit, there are advantages to going as soon as possible and disadvantages to waiting longer. In terms of in the facility in basically a spent fuel pool for some amount of time. And actually, this is one of the things that the plants do need to somewhat optimize is how long does it sit there? Because as we'll see in a little bit, there are advantages to going as soon as possible and disadvantages to waiting longer.
Waiting?
In terms of what the actual isotopic composition is going to be inside. But so let's say it sits there and it cools for 6 months. Now it's radioactively cool enough and thermally cool enough that it can be dealt with. Take it out of the spent fuel pool, and then in what looks like a somewhat violent application of it is the assembly is laid on its side, and this massive blade goes across and slices through the fuel assembly. So we're normally
what the fuck are they talking about?
The fuel assemblies and the rods and treating them very delicately. And now we have.
Oh, I'm sorry. Let me just so that I'm not talking over this guy.
In what looks like a somewhat violent application of it is the assembly is laid on its side, and this massive blade goes across and slices through the fuel assembly. So we're normally very careful with the fuel assemblies and the rods and treating them very delicately. And now we have this like hydraulically, it's a hydraulically powered guillotine type of machine that just jams through.
Now, just in case just in case you're one of the nuclear engineers that is, listening to this latest content to get, and that's what this guy is saying is decouple media. Decouple. Again, if they're not talking about this, you would think that they'd be cognizant of, like, we don't want to give the impression that we're talking about something like this. No, you didn't, especially things like nuclear war is in the news. Okay, so if you've got people that you're trying to draw into your content, you're talking to other men out there that need to know how to control their women and keep the lights on by getting the women to pay for them. Pay them the money. That's why, look, there was up to 7 of them. Then when they go away, it's because I'm hitting it on the nose and they're hearing me say it out loud. They're all, oh shit, she's got us. Yes, that's right. I've got you. So anyhow, these guys using these words like guillotine, slip right through it. Let me tell you something. They're trying to play to you know how they've got videos of like someone making food or eating food, and they capture the sound of the crunch because they know that, like, people who are addicted to eating a lot of food, they want to hear the crunch. They want to see you break the bread and squish it. There's like all this fetish type level contemplations that's going on here. They wouldn't use those kinds of language. It's just uncomfortable to use, to say things, to bring things to mind, like guillotine, slice right through it, violent. Those are words that people don't want to hear necessarily. Well, no, this must be playing to their audience. It must be playing to their audience. And of course, all the agents have gone to go talk to their supervisors. Well, I'll still be here talking when you guys get back.
And cuts off these little, normally very careful with the fuel assemblies and the rods, and
normally very careful.
And now we have this, like, hydraulically it's a hydraulically powered guillotine type of machine that just jams through and cuts off these little 3 centimeter or so segments of the fuel pins, and then they all drop down in below, and they're collected in a container down below. Some things you have to remember from our previous discussions is we have fission gases that are now all going to be instantly released the first time you cut into these fuel rods. So again, everything has to be contained. You have to be able to vacuum out those fission gases so that they don't just, disappear up into the atmosphere. You have xenon and iodine and some other nasty things like that.
And they get filtered in resins and stuff like that. And
they'll be filtered before the gas is going to be, ejected out into the atmosphere. So those things will be collected. But this is one of the kind of recurring themes that will come up, is you have these various waste streams. And so this is the first one, is you have these fission gases when you slice through the material, or slice through the fuel assemblies, and they escape. So after then, these little pellets.
Holy God! Fission gases. Break them into 3 centimeter pieces that fall down. They escape, he said. He said escape. He said escape. I'm thinking soul. I'm thinking spirit. I'm thinking transferring living beings into the digital twin realm. Did I just get it again? Is that what we're doing? We're transferring life into their digital twin metaverse. Oh, God, they're so in trouble. Oh, I tell you. As you were saying?
Ejected out into the atmosphere.
I just want to capture that whole sentence.
Contained, and you have to be able to vacuum out those fission gases so that they don't just, disappear up into the atmosphere. You have xenon and iodine and some other nasty things like that.
And they get filtered in, like, resins and stuff like that. And
they'll be filtered before the gas is going to be, ejected out into the atmosphere.
Okay, filtered before they get ejected.
And they get filtered in, like, resins and stuff like that. And
they'll be filtered before the gas is going to be, ejected out into the atmosphere. So they're going to be collected. But this is one of the kind of recurring themes that will come up, is you have these various waste streams. And so the first one is you have these.
This is very good AI, by the way. These are not people. This is AI. This is very good, though.
So after then, these little pellets, chunks that have been violently sliced apart, drop down, and they're collected. They still have the outer cladding on them, although, you will have some, because of this ceramic inside, you'll have some fission fragments start falling apart, and it becomes a kind of a little bit of a mess, but it's all collected together in one container at the bottom. You then go and dissolve this in boiling nitric acid, because you need
so he's using the language. He's using the language of literal murder level stuff, like the keywords that murderers and torturers would like, and that's the sad, sickening truth. the sad, sickening truth is that all the sorry, I start saying all the materials that are being captured from these pedophiles and that's torture material. Like those people don't become creeps like that on a soft level. These are like hardcore creeps. So these guys are using key languages that would appeal to the torturer out there, which is why I'm led to believe that it supports. They're describing something that is certainly not living. That's too obvious. You wouldn't go around talking like that if you were actually murdering people. No, they're talking about simming our spirits and containing the information that's in a brain. And how to get rid of the information they don't like and how to keep the information they do. That's what they're talking about. Ooh. Uranium, plutonium, huh?
In one container at the bottom. You then go and dissolve this in boiling nitric acid because you need to get rid of you need to pull out the uranium, plutonium fission products. This UO2 ceramic now is going to be boiled in nitric acid to pull that apart and separate it from the cladding of the material that is on the outside.
So moving from a solid to a liquid phase in terms of the pellets, yeah?
Going through a solid to liquid phase, you're dissolving the uranium material or the leftover fuel material, the fuel meat, into this material and then separating it from the cladding material.
And I will think of uranium dioxide fuel pellets as a coffee cup. It's a ceramic as well, so you got to like basically melt this mug, I guess. And nitric acid is a nice way to do it.
Dear God.
I'm sure they know why it's the best, but it's what they use in the
What are they talking about?
But we do need to separate everything, right? And because it's highly
Phones. What are you guys talking about?
hammer and a chisel trying
Fucking A, my
No,
God.
it's like a coffee cup. It's a ceramic as well.
By the way, does anybody get the feeling that we're talking about nuclear weapons? Does anybody? Of course, there's hardly anybody ever here, but I'll go ahead and talk to the greater audience. Is anybody getting the feeling that we're talking about nuclear weapons? Anybody getting the feeling that we're talking about that? That's crazy. The door just moved and the bells just rang, but no one's right there. Fascinating fact. Great. There's now a black op in the room. And you better stay the fuck away from me or else I'll kick you in the balls and you'll fly to Mars. So,
like basically melt this mug, I guess. And nitric acid is a nice way to do it.
The chemistry
Just
people,
did again.
I'm sure they know why it's the best, but it's what they use in this
Okay.
facility. But we do need to separate everything, right? And because it's highly radioactive, we can't have a guy sitting there with a
must be the wind.
hammer and a chisel trying to
That's right, I have my
the
window open.
individual parts of the pellets. And
Right.
you want to make sure that you're getting all of the material because it is.
Yeah, it's the wind. Fair enough. Trying to freak me out. I'm doing research. Don't ring my bell and move my door.
Cesium in there now because there are some trace bits of iron that will be of the components. So they don't actually a guy sitting there with a hammer and
You have to melt this.
it's
this
so
mug,
disgusting.
I guess.
You gotta melt the mug.
the fuel meat into this material and then
Lord.
separating it from the cladding
Even
material.
if these guys are nuclear engineers and they just enjoy talking about it in this fashion, they're still in trouble.
And I always think of uranium dioxide fuel pellets as a coffee cup. It's a ceramic as well, so you got to like basically melt this mug, I guess. Nitric acid is a nice way to do it.
The chemistry people, I'm sure they know why it's the best, but it's what they use in this facility. But we do need to separate everything, right? And because it's highly radioactive, we can't have a guy sitting there with a hammer and a chisel trying to pound out the individual parts of the pellets. And you want to make sure that you're getting all of the material because it is quite valuable.
Can you recycle the zircaloy fuel cladding stuff, or is that too contaminated?
It's generally too contaminated because you started with a nice pure zircaloy, but by the end of it, it's picked up a bunch of hydrogen, it's been oxidized, it has cesium in there now because there are some like trace bits of iron that will be in some of the components. So they don't actually recover it, at least not currently. The casings,
Another waste stream.
It's another waste stream now. So all the casings come out and they're pressed into basically a cylinder so that you're minimizing the volume, and it's high radioactive because you're not going to get absolutely everything out of there. And that goes off into its waste stream. next, you now have this kind of dissolved mix of uranium, plutonium, and fission products in this nitric acid. And we now get into the actual Purex part of it. And this is done in an aqueous mixture with an
Purex is the name of a process he's talking about. Pure X, like ex-girlfriend, ex-wife, mother. Okay, so this is what I'm saying. This is why it fits the theory and the narrative. And what did he say?
We now get into the actual Purex part of it. And this is done in an aqueous mixture with
Aqueous mixture, like acquiescence, trying to keep her out of the trying to make it look like on the record that she's not doing anything. I'm telling you, this is because this is what was done to me. So I'm able to find my storyline in this information, the same way that I'm finding everything else that God's been guiding me to. It's fascinating. At the same time, so it's revealing information I would never have found on my own. But it's also fascinating because God is doing this in a certain way that is allowing my life to line up with things in such a precise way. It's mind blowing. But so anyway, as this guy said, Purex aqueous mixture.
Dissolved mix of uranium, plutonium, and fission products in this nitric acid. And we now get into the actual Purex part of it. And this is done in an aqueous mixture with, and I apologize, I have to look this up. It's the tributyl phosphate, TBP material.
Tributyl, huh?
That they use. And what they do is they selectively tune this material to either pull out uranium or plutonium. And the advantage that they have here is because everything's a liquid, you can do this continuously online sort of thing. You can have this kind of stream of this fuel coming in. You can start to mix it with this liquid material, and then you can individually start pulling off a plutonium stream and then a uranium stream, and the fission products are generally left behind. So you are able to individually pull out the two. And there are advantages and disadvantages to that.
My understanding was like, and maybe I'm wrong on this, was sort of like what you're taking advantage of is that like uranium and plutonium just behave super differently than the fission products. And I think this is overly simplistic, but like the uranium and plutonium, it's almost like they'll dissolve in oil, whereas the fission products will dissolve in water. And basically that's sort of how you're able to separate them. Am I way off there? Or is that because your TBP is in like a hydrocarbon?
Exactly.
Exactly.
They make it like a organic hydrocarbon solution, and exactly like you said, where it's oil. This kind of not oil, but it's like an oil where it will selectively pull out the uranium, plutoniums, and other higher actinides, transuranics, and things like that. And the fission products, because of the way they behave, they're left behind, and they can be drained out and
another waste stream
handled separately.
Another waste stream
solution, and exactly like you said, where it's oil. This kind of not oil, but it's like an oil where it will selectively pull out the uranium, plutoniums, and other higher actinides, transuranics, and things like that. And the fission products, because of the way they behave, they're left behind, and they can be drained out and
another waste stream
handled separately. And that does become another waste stream. So we'll get to the uranium and plutonium and what happens to them next in a minute. We'll handle our fission products. Our fission products then are going to be taken out because they're now in a separate stream. We're going to try and reduce the volume of that because fission products are still quite nasty. They're still very radioactive, and they will be radioactive for a very long time, hundreds of years, 500 years kind of time. We try to then collect those down and basically calcinate and vitrify them into this borosilicate glass. This is a very typical approach that's done for a lot of other type of fission products where you want to try and really immobilize some material from moving around, make it into a very stable thing. So they blast it into a furnace. This borosilicate glass gets created. They create these individual cylinders that are then loaded into larger cylinders with some shielding, and then those cylinders are stored on the site unless the material came from outside of France, in which case the receiving country, in most cases, is obligated to take those fission products back. So again, another
shipping and logistics problem if you need to send fission, basically a canister of pure fission products back to Japan or Germany or something. Not something that's really ideal.
Again, the fission products are only going to be like 4 or 5% of your waste stream. So from a volume perspective, I understand this stuff's kind of and it's very nasty, very hot. Like your actinides and transuranics are mostly alpha emitters and have really long half-lives, and that's why we need to currently design deep geologic repositories so they'll last for 2 million years. But as you mentioned, the fission products are fast half-lives, a lot of penetrating gammas and betas, etc. And they but they're I guess quite small in volume. So that's kind of what I think makes this nasty problem a bit less nasty. Is that kind of accurate?
That's accurate, yeah. I mean, the fission products are atoms that were essentially randomly created from splitting of other atoms, and they're naturally, the vast majority of them are naturally unstable, and they decay rather quickly. And like I said, on the order of within a few hundred years, everything has decayed down, and it's much less than it was before, and eventually everything will settle into like lead or something else that's stable.
I understand that also means that they're thermally quite hot, and you need to kind of just keep it cooled, otherwise you can potentially it could catch on fire, like the Russians had happen. The Malik site, I believe.
Malik? Fascinating, because my daughter's name is Alec, and my situation where I'm the Christ and my daughter's the Christ, and they've stolen my genetic information because it's trillion, and that's why they're mad because I'm not dead, because God actually exists. And so this whole Amalekite story with Israel's war and all that nonsense, this guy just said the Malik something or other. And if you look at their faces, they look absolutely like sickos. They look like sick fucking creeps. Let's just hear it again.
Lead, something else that's stable.
I understand that also means that they're thermally quite hot, and you need to kind of, I guess, keep it cooled, otherwise it can potentially, your container could catch on fire, like the Russians had happen at the Malik site, I believe, or Mayak site.
Something like that, yeah. I mean, you do have to worry about thermal cooling of fission products, again, especially in the early days. A lot of that cooling will have taken place, the majority of that cooling will have already taken place either at the plant before it gets shipped, or it will be while it's sitting. I remember at the first stage when we had it sit in the not spent fuel pool, but before we started doing the reprocessing on that fuel, to make sure that it was cool enough. Because like you said, when we get these fission products out, they're going to be stored in this borosilicate glass, and that's going to be stored somewhere else. Do you need active cooling on that, or is like air cooling sufficient by the time it gets to that point? What are the properties of it? And people that have designed the system, so okay, it needs this amount of cooling time based on this type of characterization.
So we've separated off the fission products in this Purex as the Purex process. So they were kind of more in that watery phase, to use some very basic.
Dear God. I mean, it sounds like they're referring to these. This sounds like, okay, oh my God. Okay. So the thing with the Epstein and the islands and the girls that were sent to go run, they would chase down and then kill and stuff. This is what I'm starting to smell. I'm starting to smell them talking about the uraniums, iraniums. Okay, because I was saying I ran out of California for my life, but they followed me out too. So I've been looking at it from the perspective, because that's what they did. Maybe it's talking about all of it. They got the system dialed in, but it sounds like they're talking about actual human beings that are like runaways or girls that were left on the streets. Again, that's what the whole thing was to go die in the wilderness. My God, it is. That's what I'm certain of. It is talking about women that are sent to go die in the wilderness, for certain. That's what it's talking about. And there's many methods of it. Well, it sounds like they're talking about having these girls. It literally sounds like they are getting energy from our bodies, our brains. It's literally what it sounds like they're talking about. And he says the waterworks, like, oh, were they crying? Were they crying? Is that what you're talking about? Oh my God, this guy's sick.
Purex process, they were kind of more in that watery phase, to use
dear God,
characterization.
Characterization.
So, do you need active cooling on that, or is like air cooling sufficient by the time it gets to that point? What are the properties of it? And people that have designed the system, so okay, it needs this amount of cooling time based on this type of characterization.
So we've separated off the fission products in this the Purex process. They were kind of more in that watery phase, to use some very basic, unelegant language on my side. And now we have this kind of more oily phase that has the plutonium and uranium in it. So how do we separate the uranium from the plutonium?
So the plutonium and uranium was already separated. So when, and again, this is where the chemistry people can probably explain it much better than me, but if you're targeting through oxidation states or reduction states, you will select it because uranium and plutonium will behave differently under different reduction oxidation states. And so that's why you have these two different streams. And I would say that this is what the appeal was in the original weapons program, is that because you want to get out the pure plutonium, the Purex process, somewhat both by design and by the way that it still is, made for pulling out plutonium specifically. Some of the newer or other processes don't necessarily do that, but if you do have a program that wants to target plutonium, then the Purex process does that because it allows you to chemically control which one you want to target. And there are quite good reasons from a neutronics standpoint as well, even back on the civil side, of why you would want to separate out the plutonium from the uranium. It would.
So you heard he said the like neutrons, right? Neutral. He said purely civil. Okay, you're not talking about nuclear as in like a mineral that you're handling. They're not talking about that.
Of why you would want to separate out the plutonium from the uranium. It would give you much better control of the downstream handling of the material. So one of the things that you would do with plutonium after you separate it out is the typical idea is that it would be remanufactured into fuel assemblies, mixed oxide fuel assemblies, or MOX fuel assemblies. And if you have a pure plutonium stream, you can add exactly the amount of plutonium that you want into that. If you have it premixed with the uranium, most of that uranium is U-238. And so that's not super valuable if you're going to feed it back into a light water reactor, for example. And depending on the actual isotopic composition of how much was in there at the time, when you pulled it out, what is the ratio of plutonium and uranium? If you don't have a way of separating the two, then you don't necessarily have a way of controlling that to a good level of detail when you're going out down the MOX route. So if you can separate out the plutonium and say, okay, yeah, we're going to get an equivalent of 5% enriched plutonium into our MOX fuel, then it's basically equivalent to a fresh fuel assembly, and we can go ahead and run that. On the other side, on the uranium side, like I said, most of that is uranium-238 with some 235. It will be a little bit more enriched than natural uranium in most cases, unless you're coming out of a CANDU reactor. But you typically wouldn't put it directly back in. It's not really that useful at around like 2-ish%, and your normal range is like 5%. So what you would then probably want to do, and what actually does happen, is now that you have this uranium, you can either re-enrich it back up to 5%, or you can mix it with some existing other uranium. Maybe you have some enriched uranium already, and you would blend it into creating some sort of in-between, maybe like 3 or 4%, in order to reuse this recovered uranium. But ultimately, these two different streams then allow you to decide what you want to do with it afterwards. And there's been a lot of debate, and you have a lot of options
about nuclear,
which route you want to go, depending on what your reactor type is and what your program.
Okay, so these guys look like your average suburban male, and the way that they advertise this channel is, if you want to keep the lights on, we prefer nuclear. Okay, it sounds like they're talking about siphoning money out of women somehow, some way, for certain. These guys are talking about all these plants over here, over there, and it's like, you guys. And they've been doing this for a long time. This has been going on since the 50s. So when there's a war and President Trump is talking shit on Iran and saying they won't get a nuclear weapon, it's because I represent Iran in the sense that they want to do me in. But I also represent Iran in the sense that my family has trustees that are managing money that they never want me to find out about because it's mega money, trillions of dollars. Okay, that's why I know what I'm talking about. They're kill me, and they're also trying to keep my money, and they're trying to be able to continue to. They think they want to control everybody, and they're finding out that they can't control me. But it's not because I'm uncontrollable. It's because they're fucking creeps. So when he's talking about them not having a nuclear weapon, it's like, are you trying to suggest that the trustees and those service providers that control everybody's life are supposed to figure out a way to subdue me? Like, that's what he's flagging when he says shit like this. I'm telling you, this situation, this end time story that's in the Bible, is talking about God being pissed off at man for what man's done. He stole from God. Man stole woman and woman's children. And God's not very happy with them. And it even says it in the scripture. There's not going to be many of them left. And it's what it says.
And how much of it you're generating. There's, a wide range of things that could happen after this point.
Again, from a novice looking at this, I do find it extraordinary, like how good this process is. And from what I understand, like, you're stripping out the fission products, these like short-lived, nasty things, and you're really getting quite a pure stream of your actinides, of your plutonium and your uranium. Like, from what I understand, there's not much fission product contamination of those two streams. So you're getting quite pure plutonium, quite pure uranium. So not only are you sort of, again, not getting much fission product contamination of what you're pulling out, the useful stuff, the plutonium and uranium, but then you're also able to really kind of cleanly separate the plutonium from the uranium through those redox differences, I guess, with the plutonium. So just to step back, like, this is an extraordinary process. Moving on, though, I guess.
No, I got it. Oh my gosh, it's gonna be fine. I'm gonna figure this out. Okay, so we know that they can make clones, and we know that I know that one of the things that they were after my genetic information for is for my sequence. They're trying to break into the divine. They're trying to break into the divine. They can make a clone, but they can't create a soul. So then we've got them, since they've had technology, they've been working on how to make a female robot, a sex bot, because that's what men are all. They're all lost in La La Land, and that's what their fascination is. They need to figure out how to make a fake womb, because these guys are ruled by a parasitic mind virus. This is the truth. They took the original being. This is what God has shown me to know. I've got the XYZ's genetics, the third strand, and the duplicate to mine. These guys are trying to break into the divine. That's what they're trying to do. That's why they've been doing all this research on my genetics. Why it's trillions of dollars they have an unjust enrichment. Unjustly enrich themselves with. So imagine this. They're trying to create a fake womb. They're trying to know the brain inside out, map the brain inside out, because these guys are a parasite that know that they're not native humans. They're a parasite trying to create a digital twin. So that's what it sounds like they're doing, because the way that his face just moved, realizing that this is a pretty good thing. I think what it sounds like they're doing is they're trying to train a system. That's what it sounds like. It sounds like they're making nuclear engineers to engineer their perfect woman out of dealing with these women, and they're gathering information, and they're separating uranium and plutonium so they can get this stream of information. It sounds like they're training a system, and maybe that's what it is. They're building their own Cherry 2000. That's what it sounds like. Because he even said it like 15, 20 minutes ago. It was like there's a lot of penetration, right? Because they're going to train it to be a sex bot too.
Pure uranium. So not only are you sort of, again, not getting much fission product contamination of what you're pulling out, the useful stuff, the plutonium and uranium, but then you're also able to really kind of cleanly separate the plutonium from the uranium through those redox differences, I guess, with the plutonium. So just to step back, like, this is an extraordinary process. Moving on, though, I guess a couple issues that come up in terms of the utility of the plutonium and the uranium that's coming out. I understand there's something called isotopic degradation, which I guess limits the number of times we can do this because plutonium sticking in the reactor, just, it's this neutron source. It keeps getting more neutrons being absorbed. It forms these, I guess, the non-fissile 240 and then the fissile 241. So let's talk a little bit about, I guess, some of the complexities of these pure end products, but why it's not quite as simple as just having, pure fissile, your weapons grade, your plutonium-239 and almost like natural uranium. You're not getting natural uranium out of this. You're getting something that's a bit different.
So I think the first thing that you said, where we have this recovery of uranium plutonium, the Purex process, for all of its difficulty in chemistry, is really extremely good at pulling out uranium plutonium. I think the numbers I saw on the La Hague plant is something like 99.5% of the uranium and plutonium is recovered. So, I mean, that's extremely good. So even if you're going through multiple times, you're recovering the vast majority of the material that you want to get out of it.
Right.
The other part that you did mention, though, is this isotope degradation. And this is where some of the narrative of reprocessing as this end savior of, if we just take all of the fuel out of the light water reactors that are running or heavy water reactors that are running and reprocess them, we can, run through an infinite number of times and we can reuse the fuel. There's a couple of very interesting things that happen when the fuel is going through the reactor, the first time, the second time, and so on. I had mentioned that most of the fuel is uranium-238. And when uranium-238 absorbs a neutron, a thermal neutron, it turns into usually plutonium-239. 239 is fissionable and useful. But that's only after it absorbs a single neutron. If it stays there longer and absorbs a neutron again, now it becomes plutonium-240. And plutonium-40 is not fissionable, so it's not super useful. If it sits there again longer, then it absorbs plutonium-241, and 241 is again fissionable, so it is super useful. If it absorbs another one, then it's plutonium-242, and so on. And 242 is not fissionable. And once you start getting up amongst these higher ones, the amounts become smaller and smaller and become less of a concern. But the ultimate overall effect of this is that the longer that the fuel sits in a light water reactor, where you have a lot of thermal neutrons flying around, yes, you do produce plutonium, but you produce less of the useful plutonium that you want. The plutonium that you want is plutonium-239 and 241. And you have two competing effects here. Well, one, you have plutonium-239, which is fissionable. It is also fissioning in the reactor as it's being created. It's serving as a fuel source. And like I said, towards the end of the light water reactor's fuel cycle, about 50-60% of the power is coming from that plutonium-239. So that's plutonium-239 that you can't recover later. So what actually happens is, if your goal is to maximize production of plutonium-239, it turns out that very lightly roasting or very lightly operating the reactor, so typically like less than a fuel cycle in a pressurized water reactor, is the optimal amount in order to produce plutonium-239. If you go beyond that and then you start getting 240, 241 is good again, but 242 is bad. So when you get to these higher burnups, then you end up with proportionally more plutonium-240, which is not so useful. And this is what happens if you're going to use a light water reactor cycle and reprocess it, is every time you go through, if you're planning on operating it again for these full, 36, 48 months in the reactor, you're consuming mostly 239 when you're doing that, and you're left with less useful plutonium-240. And because it's a thermal reactor, you don't have fast neutrons. The fast neutrons in a fast reactor could use the plutonium-240 and cause fast fissions, but a thermal reactor cannot. And so if you kept doing this over and over and over again, and you're only consuming 239 and 241, you proportionally end up with more and more of this less useful plutonium-240, 242. And so even though you have this Purex process where you can pull out a pure stream of uranium, which is mostly going to be uranium-238, and plutonium, which at that point is going to be mostly plutonium-240 and 242, those are not fissionable materials. So yes, you're pulling out plutonium, but it's kind of useless plutonium.
For thermal reactor.
For thermal reactors, exactly. So what the problem becomes then is for thermal reactors, light water reactors, CANDU reactors, is that you can really only do this cycling through with reprocessing once, twice, before you just have so much plutonium-240 that you can't use anymore. And so not necessarily from an economic standpoint, but from a pure physics standpoint, it's not useful material that you're pulling out anymore.
Okay, so that's I think super important because before deep diving this, I was under the impression that hey, once you start reprocessing, you're using and I guess if it's fully closed cycle and it's maybe metallic fuel and you're using it not the reprocessed fuel not in a thermal spectrum reactor but a fast reactor, then yes, you potentially have that Oklo type claim of the 90,000 metric tons of spent fuel in the U.S. producing like 150 years of the U.S.'s energy demands. But when we're talking about what's actually occurring in the real world right now, like in La Hague, for instance, which takes spent pressurized water reactor fuel, runs it through Purex, gets that plutonium, mixes that with, I think, depleted uranium tails from enrichment. You're going from using, I think, 5% of the potential energy of the uranium load of that of the uranium to something like 6.5 or 7%. So it's not this like huge leap. It just sounds like basically you get a free fuel load in terms of, or you don't need to remine a bunch of uranium essentially. So you have like one more cycle, but that doesn't actually translate into extracting, massive amounts of energy from the initial fuel that went in. It's actually like very modest. I think that was one of the most surprising things for me prepping for this.
Exactly. I mean, there is this kind of romantic view that reprocessing, we have all this waste sitting around and we can reuse it if we just recycle it. Yeah, I think France has shown to us, since they're the ones that have been doing it the most, that you're getting, like instead of 1x use, you're getting like 1.6, 1.5x use out of the material, which is certainly better in terms of a material usage standpoint, but it's not, this 100x that some people might be imagining in their heads. And it is possible to get to, these multiple 10 times uses. It's just not going to be with the types of reactors that we have right now, with the thermal reactors, because in order to really make use of this material, these non-thermally fissionable isotopes of plutonium, then you have to go to a fast reactor. And that's where companies like Oklo are planning on using, fast reactors. That's where the Russians with the BN series and the Brest 300, where fast reactors are the way that you can then use this material and make it so that, okay, now we have something that we can use this material not just in a light water reactor one time. We have a route where we can use it multiple times over and over.
Before we potentially go there, we've talked about the isotopic degradation of the plutonium stream of Purex. In terms of the I guess they call it REP-U, reprocessed uranium that comes out. Again, that's not like natural uranium that comes out of a uranium mine. The enrichment level is lower, but I understand it's a little bit radioactive, not because there's fission products in it, but because of some of the uranium isotopes. So you mentioned there's sort of those not contaminating plutonium isotopes, but the heavier plutonium isotopes that make the plutonium stream complicated. There's, I guess, some, I think it's uranium-232 that creates a bit of a headache and sort of a spoilage factor where the reprocessed uranium stockpile kind of gets a bit nastier and uglier with age. Can you explain that?
There's two parts.
Did you hear
this,
that? I mean, okay, he's not talking about nuclear.
Uranium, it's called REP-U, reprocessed uranium that comes out. Again, that's not like natural uranium that comes out of a uranium mine. The enrichment level is lower, but I understand it's a little bit radioactive, not because there's fission products in it, but because of some of the uranium isotopes. So you mentioned there's sort of those not contaminating plutonium isotopes, but the heavier plutonium isotopes that make the plutonium stream complicated. There's, I guess, some, I think it's uranium-232 that creates a bit of a headache and sort of a spillage factor where the reprocessed uranium stockpile kind of gets a bit nastier and uglier with age. Can you explain that?
There's two parts to this. And so you're talking about the reprocessed uranium side, and then I think it's also worthwhile to jump shortly back to the plutonium side and talk about what's difficult on their side as well. On the uranium side, uranium-232 is a pretty strong gamma emitter. It has a relatively inconvenient half-life. I forget what it is off the top of my head, but it is a strong gamma emitter.
69 years. I looked it up.
69. Okay, there. I'm glad you remember. But it means that you cannot handle it directly with people around. So unlike, if you look at the Westinghouse or the Framatome factory of fresh fuel, there's workers directly handling the pellets. I mean, they have gloves on and things like that, but they're directly handling the material and being able to, inspect the pellets before they go in. They're able to, carry the powder from one place to another by themselves. It's a much more direct hands-on type of thing.
when you start introducing a lot of radiation, so if you have this uranium-232 that's mixed in there, then you don't have any way of pulling selectively the uranium-232 out through the Purex process. Purex is purely a chemical process, and it doesn't care if it's uranium-232, 233, 35, or 38. It pulls all of them equally together. And so you have then this mix of, again, slightly enriched uranium, not really slightly, but I mean, this used uranium material that is a mix of all these different things, and some of that's going to be 232, and that's going to be a strong gamma emitter. And this is one of the things that then adds to the difficulty in handling reprocessed material. We had mentioned that maybe you want to either mix it with natural uranium, or you want to blend it with slightly enriched or already enriched uranium, or maybe you want to re-enrich this uranium. If you wanted to re-enrich this uranium, now you need a centrifuge system that is no longer just built for handling uranium-235 and 238, which has it's very lightly radioactive with some alphas. Now you're going to be spinning around gaseous with 232, which is gamma emitter, and so if it gets out and you have some sort of leak, it's now much worse than it was with 235 or 238. So it certainly complicates. It's not just very nicely feed into you can't just drop off a container of powder of reprocessed uranium and put it in and start processing it like you did before. It's much more radioactive, and therefore all the things that come with that.
So are there any, like this, we're going to talk about this probably down the road a little bit, but there's quite a lot of MOX, mixed oxide fuel, so taking that plutonium stream, mixing it with, I think, depleted uranium from enrichment, and fueling a bunch of the French fleet with that. Are there any reactors in the world that are running off of REPU, or reprocessed uranium, that's been, I guess, re-enriched or mixed with plutonium, or mixed with, I don't know, higher enriched uranium?
Off the top of my head, I'm not aware of any. Maybe you've heard of some, but I don't, because it's not that attractive of a route. It's a pain in the ass. Yeah. It's a pain in order to try and do that. So I mean, like, one of the advantages of plutonium is that it's basically already pretty well enriched. I mean, especially if it came out at first cycle through, where it's a lot of plutonium-239 in there, then it's a lot more useful than this kind of mediocrely enriched uranium, which you can get very easily on the market, or from, like you said, from a waste stream. So it's not super useful to take out. And I believe at La Hague they generally just store it on site. They don't do a lot with it. I mean, some of it might get mixed back in, but it's really the plutonium that you're after and what's useful. And I do want to say that on this, similar to the uranium side, where you have uranium-232 in there, that's kind of a nasty. The plutonium stream is also not completely pure and easy to work with. Certain isotopes of plutonium will be relatively clean. And again, if you're going down a weapons program, then you would specifically, try and isolate plutonium-239, and there are ways that you could do that. And that's relatively not too difficult to work with. But if you had some plutonium-241 in there, which again, if the longer you leave it in there, the more plutonium-241 is going to build up.
In there.
Plutonium-241 does decay relatively quickly. I think it has a somewhat short half-life of around 14 years or something like that. That decays then to americium-241, and americium-241 is, again, a strong gamma emitter. So you have, the longer that it sits either in cooling, like I said at the beginning, this is one of the things that we have to be careful of, is how long do you let this material cool after it comes out of the reactor? Because if you let it cool for 5 years, now some of your plutonium is going to convert into americium. And so when you then pull out this this plutonium stream, if it sits, then you then have americium in your plutonium stream, simply because you've already done the separation. You could go through and clean it up again if you wanted to, but if you're just stockpiling it as a MOX powder, and you're going to use it in a fabrication process, and it sits for a period of time, now your plutonium stream is becoming more difficult to work with as well. So again, unlike the uranium, where it's nice and easy and it's a powder that you can work with and it's very stable, the plutonium stream itself can also introduce some problems.
Okay, so again, just I keep trying to summarize this, keep this clear in my head as well, but I think thematically this is really important. So with the Purex process, you're getting fissile plutonium, quite small quantities relative to the feedstock that went in. So we'll say, like 1% is plutonium, and then of the spent fuel that you're the plutonium that you're stripping off, and then you're getting a lot of the fertile uranium side of this, and that's including 238, a tiny bit of 235, a very tiny bit of 236, 232, and that's actually like a fairly large waste stream when we're talking about sort of reducing waste. We're getting those fission products, vitrifying them. We're getting a little bit of that plutonium, which is fertile. It's very valuable. If it's mostly 239, great for weapons, but also for MOX fuel for reactors. And then you're getting just a whole bunch of this reprocessed uranium, which is not being used. And I believe France is stockpiling it and hoping to use it at some point. But we have this situation where, unlike a fine French wine that gets better with age, both of these effluents of the process get worse with age and get a little more tricky. As I believe that U-232 goes down a decay chain of a bunch of daughters. One of them, titanium-210, is a really strong gamma emitter. So it's interesting. Like, I guess this all just kind of goes to show, I've attempted to simplify this, and I probably added in a bunch more complexity. But just, how if you take anything away from this is reprocessing is hard. It's complex. There's a lot of like time scales, a lot of hot cells, complex chemistry. It's a pain in the butt. The French do it. I guess for energy security reasons, for maybe national prestige, for a little more efficiency in terms of their.
No, I'm going to hear this again. This guy just laid it out,
and then you're getting
proving to us that this is not talking about nuclear.
Just a whole format of uranium. Again, just
like the uranium, where it's nice and easy and it's a powder that you can work with and it's very stable. The plutonium stream itself can also introduce some problems. Okay, so again, just I keep trying to summarize this, keep this clear in my head as well, but I think thematically this is really important. So with the Purex process, you're getting fissile plutonium, quite small quantities relative to the feedstock that went in. So we'll say, like 1% is plutonium, and then of the spent fuel that you're the plutonium that you're stripping off, and then you're getting a lot of the fertile uranium side of this, and that's including 238, a tiny bit of 235, a very tiny bit of 236, 232, and that's actually like a fairly large waste stream when we're talking about sort of reducing waste. We're getting those fission products, vitrifying them. We're getting a little bit of that plutonium, which is fertile. It's very valuable. If it's mostly 239, great for weapons, but also for MOX fuel for reactors. And then you're getting just a whole bunch of this reprocessed uranium, which is not being used. And I believe France is stockpiling it and hoping to use it at some point. But we have this situation where, unlike fine French wine that gets better with age, both of these effluents of the process get worse with age and get a little more tricky. As I believe that U-2 goes down a decay chain of a bunch of daughters. One of them, titanium, is a really strong gamma emitter. So it's interesting. Like, I guess this all just like a fine French process uranium for MOX fuel for if it's 39, great for weapons, but also for MOX fuel for reactors. And then you're getting just a whole bunch of this reprocessed uranium, which is not being used. And I believe France is stockpiling it and hoping to use it at some point. But we have this situation where, unlike a fine French wine that gets better with age, both of these effluents of the process get worse with age and get a little more tricky. As I believe that U-232 goes down a decay chain of a bunch of daughters. One of them, titanium-210, is a really strong gamma emitter. So it's interesting. Like, I guess this all just kind of goes to show, I've attempted to simplify this, and I probably added in a bunch more complexity. But just, how complex this, if you take anything away from this is reprocessing complex. There's a lot of like time scales, a lot of hot cells, complex history. It's a pain in the butt. The French do it. I guess for energy security reasons, for maybe national prestige, for a little more efficiency in terms of their uranium. Again, as you mentioned, the world's not short. Well, maybe it's short on uranium right now, but the more the price goes up, the more we look for it, the more we find. But anyway, interesting. Just to get a kind of global perspective on this whole reprocessing. Yeah, I think that brings up a good point of like, why does France do this? So like,
yeah,
I'll talk about price in a minute, but why does France do this? And Russians do it a little bit. They've now done some test rods of basically their Purex process in order to try and do VVR to VVR type of reprocessing. But like, why do you do this?
VVR to VVR reprocessing. VVR, Russian class of nuclear reactor. No, don't do that. That's VVR? Yeah, it's not W's. Okay, so acronyms. Good, I can actually help myself read. Okay, scroll down this, please. All right, we've got Veritas. Is that right? Veritas volume replicator. What? Verkers, Verbund, Rottweil, GmbH, huh? Veterans Volunteer Reserve, Manitoba, Canada. Vicks Vapor Rub. VSAM volume record. Lots of volume talk. And they mention volume a lot. And volume has something to do with computers. Mainframe disk storage management. That's what I was, so it's 18M, huh? VSAM, one of Alex's drawings said Pam C. Sam. She left me the clues to find this fucking sex trafficking ring. No shit. And I'm gonna find him. And I'm gonna find her too. Variable volume reheat. So it's got a lot to do with volume. Vintage V. Racing. Vision video recorder. Ooh. Vision video recorder. Doo-da. Voltage variable resistor. Well. Vision video recorder. It said VVR to VVR. Ooh, I know that they're working on this sim stuff. I know that they're working on this digital twin stuff. I do. I know that because it's applicable to my situation. My family, the Moores, my great-grandfather, Coleman Moore, is connected to the pneumatic patents. Robots, computing, but check it out. What I've also recently come to understand is that the old world buildings that are like the government buildings. These were all built by God, and man has been destroying them. So I'm onto them. Oh, I'm onto them, all right. Vision video recorder. Okay, so it's going to try to sell me just like a night cam. Well, I'm imagining that they could be referring to like some kind of chip inside of a person's body, because I know that I'm chipped. I found the databases where it shows them recording if I walk left, if I walk right, my hormonal secretions. This is what I found. So okay, so I was born in 1977. We've all heard those conspiracy theories about people being chipped. Well, for some reason it's not in the conversations anymore, but I think it's absolutely viable. I guarantee it too. This is probably what it is. And it's been connected to those birth certificates. The chip that they've got on us, and these men, if they get to buy a woman, that means they get the information that's coming in on this chip. I'm going to get to the bottom of this.
To try and minimize and energy security. Those are really the only two reasons that you do it. And if you had started doing it, back in the 1950s, you already had the plant built or you have the technology, then yeah, it's a way on the civil side in order to try and maximize, to minimize waste and maximize use of the material.
Civil.
It may be a bit of a legacy from the weapons side, where in the U.S. we don't have a civil reprocessing plant, but
Civil.
I'm pretty sure you can look and find that there are some military applications out there that are doing basically this process, plus some additional steps in order to maintain a weapons stockpile. So there are different reasons why you would want to do it. Economics is probably not one of them, though, at least not right now. So, I mean, we had talked about, what are the different steps that we had just gone through. We just went through this, very messy, I would say, both chemically very messy. We had boiling nitric acid, we had off gases, we had vitrified fission products that we had to store. We have two different streams of now slightly radioactive reprocessed material that we can use. all of this is going to be expensive. And so one of the things I did, in prepping for this was, okay, if we had 1 kilogram of uranium fuel that we were going to use in a normal light water reactor enriched like 5%, the cost of that is around $3,000 or so per kilogram. If you add on back-end waste storage, maybe that adds another $500 per kilogram by the time you're all said and done. So $3,500 on a once-through fuel cycle for 1 kilogram of material that you're going to be able to use. If you wanted to then generate an equivalent 1 kilogram of plutonium mixed oxide fuel, you're now in the range, and these are actual numbers that I pulled figuring out, from LaHogue and their efficiency of material in, material out, what they're doing. It's around $9,000 to $11,000 per kilogram. So you're on the order of, like 4, 5 times the price here by the time that you get all the way to the end of this, which is not so great in terms of economics.
It ain't HALEU, but
it's not HALEU bad. That's true. And this is why, like a lot of these companies that are like, we need HALEU, and HALEU is like potentially up to like $20,000, $30,000 per kilogram. But reprocessed MOX fuel or reprocessed plutonium fuel, okay, now you're down to around maybe $10,000 per kilogram.
Like, what are they talking about? I mean, like, they're talking about nuclear fuel, okay, but it's like they're talking to these engineers that are creating this stuff. So it sounds like there's like suburban nuclear engineers, like in their houses, like in their garages. What the fuck are they talking about? And HALEU, not HALEU. Hey, what are you talking? $20,000 per kilogram. Okay. What are they doing? Would you have nuclear engineers making nuclear weapons in their garages? What are they talking about?
$20,000, $30,000 per kilogram. But, reprocessed MOX fuel or reprocessed plutonium fuel, okay, now you're down to around maybe $10,000 per kilogram, slightly more reasonable, but still much more expensive than freshly mined fuel. So it's not an economic driver for doing this. You have to have other reasons. But one thing that is an interesting comparison then is at what price then does natural uranium that you mine out of the ground, how expensive does that have to be before it becomes economical to start reprocessing? So I mean, at $10,000 per kilogram at reprocessing, what is the price that you need to get freshly mined uranium at, so that freshly mined once-through fuel is like $10,000 per kilogram? Right now, freshly mined uranium is about $85 a pound, about, what is that, like $200 per kilo or something like that, for natural uranium mined out of the ground. It needs to go up to around $360 per pound. So again, you need to have this kind of 4x, 5x price increase in the natural uranium mining side, because the enrichment process is really not going to change in price. If you're just trying to isolate the mined uranium material, the enrichment process is not really going to become more expensive. The fabrication doesn't become more expensive. So until we get to a point where natural uranium 500% increases in price, reprocessing at least
chemistry, etc. then you're going to have to pay that off over the first 20, 30 years. And so I think that's sort of a theme we see more broadly when we talk about, bringing heavy industry back to the West is, okay, like what does aluminum cost from a smelter plant to build from scratch versus one that was built, I believe there's one in the States built in 1902 and the other one 1980. So the economics of reprocessing get even more challenging when you don't have, as the French do, sort of this legacy asset, which is maybe one of the reasons why they keep doing it, despite the higher cost. When you mentioned okay, one of the motivations is reducing the amount of waste. I guess what you are getting is, again, you're getting a second run through of that plutonium. What you're really reducing, it seems to me, is the enrichment tails, because from what I understand it, MOX fuel is basically taking that plutonium stream off Purex, mixing it with depleted uranium, not the reprocessed uranium because of the it's kind of nasty and has that U-232 in it. So you're getting rid of the enrichment, the depleted uranium tails from the enrichment process, and putting that to some use. Of course, you're also irradiating it and creating kind of waste that you also have to then figure out and maybe put in a DGR. So this isn't like some miracle to me in terms of reducing the amount of waste. I guess it reduces theoretically the amount of new uranium you'd have to mine. That's where it's sort of like eco and green, I guess, if we want to frame it that way.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's.
Mm-hmm. These guys are not talking about nuclear. Then you have to put it through the DGR. Deep Geologic Repository. Nuclear waste. Deductible gift recipient. Dividend growth rate. Dangerous goods regulations. Dirección General de Rentas. Director General's requirements. Director of Government Relations. Deliberg Junta Regionale. Duodenoggastric reflux. Duodenogastric. Dangerous game rifle. Fuck. These pieces of shit. Directorate General Resettlement. Designated Government Representative. Did Die Group. Daily going rate. Okay. Dead guy running. Oh, fuck. Dynamic growth and reconfiguration. Denver and Rio Grande Railroad Company. Division of Geothermal Research. Devil's Gulch Route. Dear God. Department of Geographic Research. Very concerning. Very concerning. Everything is very concerning.
It's a good process, but I wouldn't call it a great process. At least once through light water reactors, thermal reactors, it helps reduce the need for additional mining. It does help in terms of the ultimate amount of physical, high-level waste that need to be buried is reduced, at least in terms of the volume, because you're able to separate out the fission products and you're able to burn up some of the other things. But I mean, once through MOX fuel that has gone in there, I mean, the very long-lived transuranic isotopes that make spent nuclear fuel such a problem, those just keep getting built up in the spent fuels. Or by the time you go through a second time or even a third time, again, you have these really long-lived transuranics that get built up because the thermal reactor isn't burning them. And so your spent nuclear fuel becomes incrementally hotter. Again, that's not really a problem as I see it. I mean, your storage container that you're burying in a geological repository maybe has to be slightly different. Maybe you have a little bit more decay heat or shielding that you have to work with. but it's not, enormously different from once there's spent nuclear fuel. But yeah, your real savings is coming from, okay, we're able to reuse some of the tailings that we otherwise were just sitting in a canister somewhere, and we don't have to go out and freshly mine, 30-ish% if you could do it to all of the material, which is certainly a benefit, but it's coming at a pretty high cost.
Independent analysis only works if it's independently funded. If Decouple provides you with energy literacy on demand, please consider supporting it.
Energy literacy. So again, this is the energy industry. This is the electrical engineers industry. This is an industry that's been around since like 1950. This is the agenda of man against woman because, and I'm going to get to the bottom of it. I happen to have insight on the fact that, well, the Anunnaki said it, that they took the original human and they split it into two beings, the man and the woman. And and that's what I represent. God sent it in again. So they turned it into two beings and they lost their divinity. That's why these are parasites that are trying to take everything that a woman has, a womb, our brains. I have every reason to be onto them. I have every reason to believe that that's why they call it a nuclear family. That's why they call it a nuclear family. It is the nuclear industry. And the nuclear industry is every single way in any area that they can monetize us. And I'm onto them. And not only am I onto them, but God guides me. And it's God's cosmos. That's who's putting me in charge, is God. So just so you know, you don't need to tell yourselves, she's so smart, we need to silence her and all that other shit. You need to tell yourself, oh fuck, we're exposed. God sees us and God's representative. I'm the void, the vessel. The Holy Spirit dwells within me. That's what all of this information amounts to, is that God speaks through me. God guides me. I'm sealed. Okay? And this is information for the whole entire world. The whole world is going, God, please help us. These creeps, these weirdos. Well, God's paradise is, we're in the process of the shifting and the changing of the guards. And I'm our captain, guys. So thanks for finding this page. You should keep your ears open, because I'm a sequestered prisoner of these pieces of shit. And I'm gonna get this world into, I'm gonna get this kingdom here, come hell or high water. So we need to keep our eyes and ears open for what the creeps are up to. They're stealing children. They're monetizing everything. And I suggest you check this out. Decouple Media. There's your advertisement, Decouple. Thanks for giving us all your information. Pieces of shit. Now, I must have hit the volume button. I've made jokes before about wanting to wear a mustache for Halloween. Well, I would only wear a mustache that had some style. First of all, not a mustache that made me look like a pedophile, but my point is, you guys, mothers especially, you cannot trust the men people. And I'm not starting a revolution against them, because I actually there are good men that are far and few between though. And I have empathy for them. But I happen to know that they're also sick and twisted. And so are the women. So are the women that love all this stuff. This world is this is the sifting of the sands. You're either a creep or you're a person that wants a peace world, a peace-filled world. You're either evil or you're good, and that's what it comes down to. So the truth of the matter is this, but saying it like that, saying it's the evil and the good that are being separated, that doesn't cut it. It's the numbers. The numbers don't lie. Men are violent. Men are the ones that are in charge, and that's why it's men that are the problem. They're being in control. They're trying to rule this world. Well, guess what? God's giving me everything that I need to get this job done. We're going to get the orbs. That's right. So you can't dig a bunker deep enough to stay away from my eyes and my team. Those are the orbs. That's right. So you guys and your military bullshit quagmire, does that word mean fake war? Mr. Trump, Mr. Hegseth, you people make me sick. You're not out of time yet, though. Between now and whenever the God clock strikes, God's code is in the nick of time. So if you decide that you don't want to be carted off into the reduced down to a Planck length where you get to observe reality for an orbit or whatever it is that God's going to do with you, I'm here to tell you, you're going to want to snap out of this, and you're going to want to come clean, and you're going to want to give me my daughter back, and you're going to want to do that before the God clock strikes. That's all I have to say for right now. Till next time.